Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisey, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Rob Lynch, CEO of the Professional Cricketers Association, who brings a wealth of commercial acumen and sport management knowledge to our podcast. With over 20 years in various leadership roles, Rob's journey from a professional cricketer to a commercial leader has seen him navigating complex negotiations and driving innovative deals, including being the driving force behind the collective rights deal that focuses on digital and data rights for the PCA. Rob's leadership of the PCA during the COVID-19 pandemic exemplifies his resilience and adaptability, further demonstrating his capacity to navigate through crises. With a background that includes impactful roles in Middlesex cricket and the development of sports tech at Pitch Vision, I'm looking forward to hearing Rob's take on all things recruitment and talent strategy in the sports industry. Rob, welcome to Talent Talks. How are you?
I'm very well, very happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, very happy to have you. I think there's going to be some fascinating insights. So let's get straight into it. We ask this to each of our guests to begin with as a starter question. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired, and do you have any lessons learned?
Yeah, sure. And as your very kind introduction suggested, I'm now the CEO of the PCA, which is my first CEO role, which I started actually 2 weeks before the COVID Monday lockdown back in 2020. So to say it's been an interesting few years is an understatement, but certainly I've learned a lot of things about recruitment during that time. I think firstly from a CEO's perspective, which is the first time that I've had to oversee effectively all appointments in our organization. And then secondly, how I think recruitment has changed in that period. And I think largely driven by the challenges of COVID and the sort of new world that we live in from a professional perspective, if you like. And obviously breaking that question into two different parts, being hired and hiring, firstly focusing on the hiring piece. The first thing I'd say is the importance of a trusted relationship with the recruitment company and individuals within it that you have. Those relationships are vital. You're effectively paying someone to find you the most important tools to run your business. So having that trusted relationship with recruiters and recruitment companies, I think, is vital. Ensuring in the last couple of years, obviously, there's been a hell of a lot more focus, not only in the cricket industry, but in the broader industry, of fair and open recruitment strategies and opportunities, ensuring that we're trying to get the most diverse and highly talented pool of candidates to come forward, which I think is a major change as opposed to what I've certainly experienced in parts of my career going back, more of a sort of it's not what you know, it's who you know kind of perspective, and corners being cut, which simply we can't and won't do in the future. So sort of a lot of lessons learnt there. And that sort of leads to having the right policies in place as an organization also. And I think, one of the lessons or more so an observation that I've had in the last couple of years is how I believe there's been a sort of swing in the power dynamic to the employee over the employer. And one of the really challenging parts of, particularly at senior recruitment level, is right in the pointy end of it, where you're trying to appoint, where I actually think all the cards, if you like, end up going to the prospective employee, because you're invested at times 6 months into that process, a lot of money into that process, and they in essence have the hand, so to speak, because you certainly don't want to go through that process again, not only from a time perspective, an expense perspective, and obviously by that time you've obviously put your decision in place that you've got the right person. So I think that's a major change. And then I think about being hired, and if someone asks me some advice on going for a job, or they've found their dream job and now they want to do everything they can to do it, the first thing I'll say is think of that as a full-time job. So trying to get a job is a full-time job. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was, I think the real role that's given my career in the last 10 years or so a more sort of senior direction was when I got what was commercial manager's role at Middlesex in 2015, I think it was. to make a long story short, I got a call from someone I knew saying, "Hey, Middlesex are looking for this role. I think you'd be great for it. Please, recommend you look into it." From that day, for what was about a 4-month process, I dedicated every day to do something to try and get that job, because I wanted to work for Middlesex. I wanted to be back at Lords where I started my career, and I sort of knew that a job like that might be the one that gave me the springboard to sort of elevate my career from that. And I did that. And that got down to the last 4 in the process. And the brief was to present a 20-minute presentation on the future commercial strategy of Middlesex. I paid a designer about 500 or 600 quid to do something that looked really slick, really professional. I sort of backed myself that no one would be going to that lengths of the other candidates that I was up against. And I practiced that the day before about 15 times to my wife. Each time I got it wrong in some capacity and didn't sleep much that night. But I went into that interview on the Monday and absolutely nailed it, and was told later that actually I was the 4th preferred candidate going into that last interview. But my preparation and everything I put into that was the catalyst for me getting that job. So, it's one thing saying you want a job. It's another thing sort of dedicating everything that you've got to getting that job. And I think that's a really strong lesson that I certainly try and put to people who ask me.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to unpack in that answer, and we can go back and forth. But I think just that last point there, and it relates to the power dynamic as well, in the sense that I completely agree with you. Employers and organisations now have to sell themselves to employees as much as it was previously, and rightly so, in my opinion. I think that you need to find the match that means that you're both happy with the result, because ultimately, if you both are, there's more value being added. But I do think as well that example there of the Middlesex commercial management role, I think there is also a shift slightly of ease of applying to roles. LinkedIn's the perfect example, and a necessary evil in terms of the amount of times you can just press easy apply without really understanding what you want and why you want it. So I think that, yes, whilst the power dynamic, I completely agree, has shifted, I do think if you're a candidate, the most successful candidates will be the ones that actually put the effort, as you said, the effort into researching not only the organisation and the role, but actually how you can add value to that right now, if you went in right now, but how that value can be added over the next 6 to 12 to 18, 24 months, not just from the role perspective, but actually also from the wider organisation perspective. What impact can you make on the organisation's goals? Because ultimately, most of the time, they're fairly easy to find on websites in terms of what their objectives are, and whether that's a huge organisation where you have to check their annual reports or look through their financial reports and just see, what are we aiming for? What does the company that I want to work for, what do they value, and how can I actually really impact on that front?
Yeah, look, I entirely agree with that, and particularly the point of selling yourself as an organization. And, I'm sure we'll sort of come on to team dynamics and the importance of team dynamics. But team dynamics start from ensuring that an organization has the right values and philosophies. And ultimately, the way that I view it is that I have the honor and the privilege at the moment of sailing a ship in a direction of travel of which the organization needs to be very, very clear of what that end destination looks like, if there actually ever is an end destination, of course, because we're always on that journey. And my very simple way of looking at it are the various people that we want to get on that boat. Are they on that boat willing and wanting and on the same journey as to what I'm setting out? Because if you're not, quite frankly, you're on the wrong ship. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where I sort of like to pitch the organization. And we've spent 4 or 5 years now at the PCA sort of redefining in a lot of ways what the PCA is and what we need to do. And we did that by looking back as to why the organization was set up, which is fundamentally, as it won't surprise you, to represent the interests and views of the current professional careers here in England and Wales, becoming a much more challenging thing to do as the world gets more complex and our industry gets more complex as the sort of global dynamics come into play. But what I've found linking this back to recruitment is, if someone doesn't understand that, A, hasn't done their research, and B, doesn't understand that, or you think you can work out pretty quickly is not going to be that right fit for the organization, that's just not going to work, and it's not going to work for anyone. And that's, again, where you link in the role of a recruiter to sift a lot of that out at the senior levels. And as I'm talking, actually, there's one of our board appointments, which I think is probably worthwhile and just highlighting. We, in the last 18 months, have refreshed and, I suppose, made our non-executive board fit for modern governance standards, if you like. And we had two individuals that came in for what we thought was one role. And myself and the then chair at the time, with a few of our board colleagues, were sitting in these final interview processes. And one of the candidates came in and did her thing and left, and me and my chair looked at each other, and we both kind of said, she could do this job like you and I. She had just done her home. She absolutely blew us away, as did the other candidate that was coming in for the same job. So we ended up saying, hey, you know what? We've just found two great candidates here, so let's bring them both onto our board. Yeah. And that was purely because they'd done their homework and they had everything so well down that it just blew us away. And again, I suppose the importance of preparation once you get to that point. But prior to that, we can put that role of the recruitment company that we engaged on that project to putting the right people forward to us, which was obviously very valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And that relates down to more junior levels as well, in the sense that if you're going for use commercial manager again, you're going for a commercial manager role, but you've got two very, very good people. It comes down to the organisational selling as much as anything else. But if they really want to join you, you then have somebody further down the line that you think, actually, another role has come up, which we know this person is going to be in for. So you don't have to necessarily go through all of the recruitment processes, the cost, the time it takes to do that, because you've got that bank of people that have done that role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the importance of relationships, because it's a very incestuous little world that we live in, so I totally agree with that.
Well, leads on to my next question. Exactly that. You mentioned the kind of team dynamics, but also in your first answer, you talked about the diversity element and the policies that you put in place to make sure that you're getting diversity of thought, but also diversity in terms of D&I and race, gender, etc. How do you, from a PCA perspective, how does your recruitment work when you're looking at different roles? How do you make sure that those policies are put in place? What are the practical elements to ensure that's implemented? And how does that then ultimately impact on things like, as you mentioned earlier, the team dynamic, which is crucial when you're hiring?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it won't surprise you if you know anything about the cricket industry that we've obviously had the absolute focus put on us from an EDI perspective as an industry, and rightfully so. And therefore, we've been, very much under the microscope, if you like, for this. And look, being very honest with you, the organisation that I inherited was entirely white. And that was obviously not a great place to be. And I'm very proud to say that I'm looking at the organisation now, it's a very different organisation to that of 4 and a bit years ago. A, it's grown, and B, it's become more diverse. We had a leadership team of 3 white males. That leadership team now is of 7, of which 3 are females, 2 from diverse backgrounds. And I love the team that we've created, because the different thoughts, the different viewpoints. And also, the PCA was very much an organisation that knew about cricket. And I know that sounds a bit strange, but I love employing people that don't come from cricket backgrounds, because we know all the cricket we need to know, so to speak. And bringing in people that come from completely different backgrounds can answer some very simple questions that people like me, who have worked in the industry sort of all my life, when posed with a different view like that, you often sort of scratch your head and think, well, yeah, I didn't think of it like that. Just because you're so ingrained in the way that you've been tuned to think, so to speak. So I give that background, I suppose, to highlight the importance of what it can bring. And in regards to sort of how have we done it, sort of various different strategies, really. We've implemented a fully open recruitment policy, and within that policy, within the organisation, we have a blind recruitment process. So there's only, if we're recruiting internally, which we normally do for certain level jobs and below, then there's our HR manager as the only person who knows who's who, so to speak, within that, and filters the process from that perspective. And then if it's senior roles, we engage a recruitment company which has a blind process right through to a certain level. And I've got quite a cool story with one of my recent hires, which is our CFO, a wonderful woman named Neil, who joined us about 9 months ago. And I was presented with the 12 sets of answers to the questions that the 12 candidates who were identified by numbers filled out when we were obviously down to 12 candidates. And our job being the panel of 5. And again, that's another important point, having a diverse panel, the selection panel, which has to happen on every role that we have, either by bringing in externals or doing it internally. But that's a non-negotiable, so to speak. And in this process of 12, I wrote back to the recruiter, here are my scores, I've answered the questions, etc., etc. I can't wait to meet candidate 2, 3, 4, or whatever the number was. Now, that candidate happened to be the one that we employed, weeks later, who has been, one of your other questions that may come up is, what is one of your better hires? This is absolutely one of them. And I'm so proud of the process we went through because A, it was a great process, and B, it threw out the absolute right answer that, 9 months later has been, one of the best things that I've ever done in the organisation so far.
It's amazing. It's excellent. I think, yes, you've cannibalized one of our quick fire questions, but we can repeat that. So that's absolutely fine. No, I'm only joking. What's really interesting there is the various different elements of removal of that bias, which I think, with technology coming into the recruitment process, there is then the danger and the challenge of, does that increase bias in certain instances, especially with the influx of kind of AI in recruitment tech and those types of things. But I do also think that done correctly and done well, you can do that at scale, and you can do that making sure that you're adhering to the right policies, the organizational client policies, whatever that might be, to make sure that you're getting the right people in regardless of their background. How do you go about, certainly less on the senior side, more on the slightly junior side, you say your HR manager runs that process. How do you go about ensuring that job roles that have come up within the PCA are advertised as widely as possible and not just within, let's say, LinkedIn, the kind of standard LinkedIn networks and by extension, your network, i.e. the kind of the people that you know and the people that your staff know, which, again, that's still going to be a relatively small network and predominantly within the sports industry. So how do you try and kind of counter that to make sure that goes a bit wider?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a good question, and it's a challenging one. I think, there is inevitably that, let's call it organic advertising that happens from a role through personal and organisational channels. And I think that's always going to be there. And if someone does come forward through that process, i.e. someone's friend or colleague or someone they know, I'm pretty open to that, because all it does from my perspective is, or the response, if you like, is, okay, great, you're interested. Here's the process, so off you go. So, you've been given the nudge, so to speak, from a friend of yours, and then you just put that person into the process that, what we just discussed. But in regards to advertising, I mean, yes, cricket is a very incestuous industry, and there are cricket media organisations that we use. There's various specific cricketing job networks that are out there. We run one ourselves, even the PCA. So we advertise jobs within cricket. There's another one, ironically, with a guy I used to work with many years ago. And I think sort of there has been times where we would go slightly broader than that, and we would put it out through more mainstream media. That's when it starts to attract sort of big costs, is when you need to sort of weigh up the benefits versus the challenges. I think also a couple of times we have gone out to recruit and not had the response that we were hoping for. And so that's an indicator, obviously, that something's not quite right by pure volume of quality, in this case, not coming in. So, hey, we need to do something different here. So I don't think there's any sort of one answer to that. I think it's a sort of a case-by-case basis somewhat. And also, notifying, or I suppose sort of clarifying that, the PCA is not the HSBC. We're not a big organisation, so we're not recruiting sort of every day. And I suppose we do have the ability to be a little bit more bespoke in our approach. But that catchment net, however you get it, as I say, I don't think I can sort of clinically give one answer, but to ensure that we've got the best chance of attracting that diverse candidate base, then it comes down to that process. I think that once we have a number of people in whichever process that we're running, either externally with an agency or internally through our HR department.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm conscious of time, Rob, but before we get on to the quick fire questions, I want to come back to, again, something you said actually at the very beginning of the podcast around, you started just before COVID hit, which was obviously great and time for you to start, and brings with it all the challenges that we know it had. And without wanting to go back to a time that, let's be honest, very few people enjoyed. You mentioned about the changes that you've seen in recruitment and the process, and obviously the ones that you've already implemented, and we've gone and discussed a bit of that around the diversity and the policy changes that you've put in. What was your approach having come into the role new? You're then saying, right, shit, everyone's got to work from home, the huge issues around lack of income, etc., etc. How did you approach both from a talent and management perspective that time frame, bearing in mind that you'd only really just stepped into the role, but also actually what are those changes in recruitment that you mentioned that you've seen, and how have you adapted to them since COVID to today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one I've noticed, or either I didn't recognize prior, and I'm not sure which one, but I'm pretty sure it's a sort of newer evolution, if you like, is that power dynamic change to the employee. And I remember sort of within COVID or just after, when we were trying to get people back into the office, which still is an impossible task, almost to the point where you give up trying to sort of get people in the office 5 days a week, which is somewhat of a challenge for us because we're quite a people-oriented business. But I remember speaking to recruiters, and one of the first questions was, "Well, how many days are you expecting this candidate to be in the office?" Well, why? Well, basically because if you're trying to say any more than 3, these people aren't going to apply. I just remember thinking, wow, like how much that has changed. And I think sort of to try and combat that the best that we can comes back to that organizational sell, if you like. And, we work in an industry that to the right people is very attractive. There are a lot of people that want to work in sport. A lot of them, from my perspective, I think do so for the wrong reasons, actually. And I think there's too many people attracted to sport because they think it's this industry where you're sitting, sipping Pimm's and champagne, watching sport all the time. And I can assure you it's very, very different to that. And, as a side point, if someone leads with which they often do, a first question in any interview process of, why does this job attract you? The first answer is often because I love cricket, which in my mind is a big no. Do not say that, because it just shows me that you're motivated from something that you're dreaming about, not understanding the realities. I've gone off topic there and on tangent, and apologies. But yeah, to combat that new challenges, if you like, my philosophy is to be very open and honest with our staff, with prospective staff. One of the reasons that I attracted the CFO that I mentioned earlier was because after the last interview, I knew that I wanted her, and I asked the recruiter to see if she would meet me the next day at 8:30 in London, because I wanted to spend an hour and a half with her, stressing to her that she is the person that I want to work with and why. And if she was on this call now, she would probably say that me taking the time and effort to do that, to show her that I wanted her, was one of the contributing factors to her accepting the job. And I knew it was right. And 9 months later, it's, so far so good. So I'm not sure if I would have even thought to do something like that 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, I'm glad I did, because I've got a great candidate. Not sure I've directly answered your question there, but there's a bit that I've scooted around the sides of it.
No, 100%. And actually, what's really interesting, I didn't want to jump in, but you're not the first person to say, if you've got, I love cricket, I love sport, then it's a turn-off, because you're right. You don't sit around, as much as it would be nice, you don't sit around talking about sport all day. There is a business imperative. Now, if you come in and say, and this is what the guest said, if you come in and say you love the business of sport and you're really interested in how you can impact on the business side of sport because of how it interacts with the wider economy, or how it, and you, again, you're adding that value element, that's very different. But coming in and just going, what, I love sport, I really want to work in sport. And that's what, a lot of people that I'm kind of candidate-wise talking to is going, look, it's a given. If you're applying to a job in sport, people know that you should have an interest at least in sport. What's the next step? Why are you actually kind of putting your name forward for that? It's not because you like cricket, it's because you want to make an impact in the value of the things that you can do, whether that's from a finance perspective, a strategy perspective, or whatever that is. That's the much more important thing.
Without any doubt. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Look, Rob, I'm conscious of your time, and it's been a fascinating conversation, and I've got a lot more questions to ask, but I don't have the time to ask them. So we'll have to get another podcast in the diary at some point in the near future. But let's get to 3 quick fire questions, one of which I think I know the answer to, but we'll ask it anyway. But we'll start with the first one. What is the most frustrating thing about recruitment for you?
The cost.
So succinct. I love that. Now, this is the one that I think we probably know the answer to, but, and again, don't name, it's entirely up to you, but who has been your best hire and why?
Well, we've spoken about sort of my professional best hire, but my best hire actually is my wife, who enables me to have the work life that I do and look after everything at home. So I was thinking about recruitment and thinking about your marriage, and in a way, it's a recruitment of sorts. So, yeah, my wife is my best hire.
Fantastic answer. I will make sure that she hears this somehow, just so that you've got that in the back pocket as well. Look, final thing from our side. What is the one thing that you would change about the recruitment world?
I'll tell you what drives me nuts is getting random emails that are worded from people that comes across that they know me like their best friend, putting forward a candidate for a role that I don't have, and then asking things like, can we schedule a call next Tuesday at 9:00 to discuss further, or click this link to schedule a call with me. The first thing I do is delete that email, and it angers me somewhat because I didn't ask that person to come with me about any candidate, and it sort of puts people on a blacklist, and it just annoys me. The same happens on LinkedIn far too much, and I just think it's a really poor practice.
Good answer. Great. All right, Rob, thanks again for your time. It's been fascinating, and I think there's a lot that people can unpick from this and take from it, from both your experiences but what you're looking for now at the PCA as well. So really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on Talent Talks.
Absolute pleasure.